Hey everybody, how are you doing? Welcome to part 2 of You Asked About Their Father. If you haven't seen part 1, I would definitely urge you to go watch that one first and then come back to this. So I'll put the link to that up here when I'm editing. And I'll also put the link to that in this video description. And I know the lighting is a little different, so I hope it's okay. I'm filming this Friday morning and it's very foggy outside here in Sarasota, Florida, and so I don't have the natural sunlight coming in. I just have a light on over the table, so I hope it looks okay. But I want to let you know that I appreciate all the questions you guys have been answering me, and I'll include those as I go along in my story, you know, like where I fit in, where they fit in, and where they don't fit in, I'll add them at the very end. I did want to let you guys know that there's going to be a final part 3 to this video, and I plan on putting that out in just 2 days on Wednesday, so that you guys won't have to wait a full week. So go ahead and continue to ask questions. I'll answer them, any further questions, in that final part 3 video. And then if any questions come in after I film that one, I'll add them to my next Q&A, which I hope to have out next Monday. So, yeah. I also wanted just to mention briefly that there have been a few comments about certain wording that I use. Like, for example, the word grape instead of, and like unenlivening instead of, and not wanting to keep the baby instead of, you know, fill in the blank. And I just wanted to let you know that the reason I use those words is because YouTube doesn't like certain words that are graphic, you know, and give hints at violence or anything like that. So I use those kind of words just to be safe here, to have my channel be safe on YouTube. A couple people have questioned whether I was using those words, perhaps being in denial about different things that happened in my situation, but that's not it. It's just because of the YouTube rules. So I hope that all makes sense. So, okay, let's go ahead and continue on with the story. So I do have a little headache this morning, so if I seem a little off, that might be why. The pollen count here is high this morning, and we've had such a change in weather. I also have my coffee. I also have my laptop next to me. This is a scripted video, just so I can refer to it, because I do want to, I wanted to get the timeline right and the things that happened, and I didn't want to leave anything out, you know, and then like have to redo the video. So I'm going to be referring to my notes a lot. Plus I have your questions sitting here. So first, let me say, I wanted to talk a little bit about E's personality. And the reason I wanted to do that is because it's pretty common for scapegoated children to get into relationships that mimic the pattern in their family. With E, he not only aligned himself with my mother, and I'm going to talk more about that here in a bit, but his personality was pretty similar. And that mainly came in the form of his non-attentiveness towards me, non-communication, and the gaslighting and things like that. Because E and I never had any important conversations, like about finances or the kids or politics or the news. There's nothing, I guess I would call it like superficial conversations, what's for dinner tonight, and we need to go to the store, and how much money do you need this week for gas and cigarettes and things like that. He also had a very pessimistic type personality, like where he looked at the glass as being half empty, and where I tend to be more optimistic for the most part, looking at like the glasses half full. And I'm just wondering, as I'm talking here, if people can change. Like, if you know somebody who has a pessimistic outlook on life, can they change and become optimistic, or vice versa? Like, I've never personally known anybody who's changed, and I'm just curious. Let me know in the comments if you've ever known anybody who has changed. And also, I'm just like curious, like do you consider yourself optimistic or pessimistic? Like, I don't know. It's just something curious, kind of like off the subject here. He had a friend he's one of these guys who thought the world was going to end momentarily. And this guy had a bunker, and he had weapons in there, and, stockpiled food rations and things like that. And he was very into it. And Eve was very much also into it, although he never went so far as to have a bunker or stockpile food. It was more of like his mental feeling. He had this he was pessimistic personality, felt the world was going to end at any minute. And then something else, just like as I'm talking right now, he also had the personality of like everybody was out to get him. Oh, and talking about that, he did have a temper, and his temper manifested as road rage. And this is where that everybody's out to get him comes into play. If you've ever experienced road rage, you know the feeling. It's quite scary, especially if you're the passenger in a car that is participating in road rage. And that certainly didn't help the anxiety that I already had, but it got so bad. It got to the point where I began to refuse to go anywhere with him in the car unless I was in the driver's seat, because it was very upsetting. And that road rage he had never ended. Even after our divorce, upon a visitation once with our youngest daughter, due to his road rage, he did get into an accident with our daughter in the front passenger seat of the car. And I can't recall how old she was. I can guess maybe 10. I'm just guessing. Probably, no, 10. No, I'm thinking she was about maybe 11 when that happened. So, in reflection, that I believe the anxiety that I've had all my life stems from being the family scapegoat. And then it just continued to increase throughout my relationship with E. The relationship was so closely mimicking how I grew up, in the different ways I was feeling, like unheard and not having a voice and all that. But back to his personality, he was also very quiet. He often referred to himself as the black sheep and the loner in his family. He was never like a hands-on father or husband. He spent the majority of his time reading, and he was very, very book smart. And his only real interest and passion was trains. And I think that was something that his uncle, who had raised him from the age of 2 to age 13, instilled in him. So, but then when computers and the internet appeared on scene, he was still very much, into his trains and reading, but then he also spent most of his time at home online. So, I also have a role in that marriage. And, when I first married E, my mom and some others said, it's never going to last. It's never going to last. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. And, so I'm like, well, I'm going to show them, right? I'm going to show them. I was going to stick to it. I was going to stick to that marriage, thick or thin. I was not conditioned to ever consider myself or think about myself. So I did feel very worthless and helpless in my marriage with E. Like, I felt like I didn't deserve better. I didn't even think that was an option. It never even crossed my mind. It's just crossing my mind as I reflect. Back then, it never even crossed my mind. I felt I had to take it. And, over time in the marriage, I learned just to shut up. Because talking meant being criticized and meant being gaslit and dismissed and all of that. But I can sit here and say that I did try. I attempted to talk with E many, many times. But I ultimately gave up because I did feel like I was beating my head up against a brick wall. And, it sounds really cliche to say, I bet I did the best I could at the time with what I had. You hear that a lot. It is very true, though. It's all any of us can do. But I don't use that saying as a means to excuse my role, because despite how I grew up and despite what's going on in my marriage, I ultimately did step back and allow myself just to take it. But I have forgiven myself for all of that. I used to regret it, but you can't live with regret, and you can't go back and change things. Can't will it in your head, like can't say like, please God, take me back so I can have a do-over. Life doesn't work that way. As a family scapegoat, I was conditioned to be at fault for everything. And so I did always blame myself for E's behavior. But, what I've learned now is that I wasn't responsible for his behavior. I wasn't responsible for him, only myself. And I realized I could have left him, but I was never the kind of person to give up. I do not give up on things easily. I wasn't able to leave him financially. I didn't want my kids to come from a divorced home. I figured they would be better from two parents in the home. And those are the kinds of things that I told myself back then. I could say, well, I could have tried harder to find a better way out, but I also didn't have any family support. So there was that too. I felt stuck. I literally very much felt stuck back at that time. And I can sit here and blame my mother for that. But, at some point you have to put on your big girl pants, and you can't blame other people for your actions. You just can't. You have to accept the reality and not participate in this blame game. So I've seen some comments saying that I'm in denial over E and that I'm not putting enough blame on him. But see, this is where I'm grown. I can tell my story without placing blame. Some more coffee, and my headache is going away. I don't know if it's the coffee or maybe just because I enjoy talking to you guys, even though, you know, it's a heavy subject, obviously. This brings me to my first viewer question that I got, and I'm going to read it. This person says, quote, "How did each daughter react to E? What was the environment like for each of them? Do you think they picked up on the non-affection going on as they grew up?" Unquote. Okay, so I do believe that kids pick up on their environment. You know, even when parents fight behind closed doors, I think children can sense when things are off. But my kids never had any overt behavioral problems or anything like that. You know, never got involved with, you know, bad groups of friends or never became addicted to anything. And no, none of my kids ever said anything. I think this type of emotional and manipulative abuse, if you want to call it that, from my family and from E, I think that's often like a hidden type of thing. Like it's something that's not believed. You know, especially being a family scapegoat, I've never really been believed in my family. Still to this day, I'm not believed. And, you know, kids come from much worse homes than mine and don't go no contact. And then kids come from much better homes and do go no contact. So I don't think I think the estrangement issue is much more about communication and perception, or lack of communication, differing perceptions more so than anything else. I remember back then I used to think at times that I wish I had bruises on me, because then maybe I would have been believed. You know, if I sat here and I held up my arms and showed you bruises, you guys would be like, oh, like, oh my gosh, you know, there's some major dysfunction there and that. But if I say it's in my head and that somebody has done this or that, often behind closed doors, where's the proof of that? And, you know, I'm not sitting here. I know some of the trolls come on and they don't believe me and they say all kinds of things, but I'm not here to try to get anybody to believe me. So that's not what it's about. You know, I'm here, like, if you resonate with me and this helps you in any kind of way, that's why I'm here, you know, not to get people to believe me. Anyway, I told you earlier that I was going to talk to you guys more about how E was aligning with my mother. And I already explained how when E threatened to throw himself over the railroad tracks and unalived himself, how when I called my mom in the middle of the night and she came over and sided with E. But there were more instances. There was many more instances that showed their alignment. And there are two that specifically stick out in my mind that I'm going to tell you about in the story. And this first one was one that I've mentioned before in another video. And this was one time when E and I and our kids, this is early in our marriage, went to my mom and stepdad's home it was Christmas, I believe. and one of my kids was a baby, and I was in the bedroom with the baby, and the baby had been crying for several hours, and I couldn't get her to go to sleep, and I was trying, and I was really tired, and living, we never lived close to my family. And so there were several family members there, and I wanted to spend time with them. And I went out in the living room where all the family was, and I'd asked E if he would please come back and take over with the baby for a little bit, so I could have a break, and so I would get a chance to visit with some of the family. And he refused to do that. And, of course, I was upset, and I went back in the bedroom and sitting on the bed, and I was still trying to console the baby. And my mother eventually came in and saw my tears and asked what was wrong. And when I tried to explain to her and that I'd ask E, to come help for a little bit, and that he refused, she screamed at me, and she sided with E, and then she put her hand on me. So some of you might remembered, I believe I told that in another video, but there is another situation that I can recall that I'd like to tell you about. This one was something else. There was one time later in my marriage that I took my youngest daughter out of school. She was in elementary school at the time. I took her out of school and went like an hour and a half away, took her to a hotel just for a relaxing, just to get away and relax. The marriage wasn't going good. I was very stressed out. And I just wanted to get away and relax. And I'm not going to go into details about why I left and if it was right or wrong to leave or whatever. But I left a note for E, and I told him that I had the youngest daughter, was going away for a couple of days, and that I would be back. I did not tell him where I was going, or why I was going. It wouldn't have mattered anyway. He never cared. He never showed any interest in what I was doing, let alone how I was feeling or why or anything like that. But this made him mad that I left, and he got the phone number from one of my friends off of our answering machine. And this was before cell phones. So he called my friend, and this was a friend who I had confided in what was going on, and she, of course, refused to tell him where I was, and he told her that he was going to call the police. So then that friend called the hotel and got a hold of me and told her that he had called her and he was going to call the police. So I felt like the best thing for me to do was to call the police myself, just let them know what was going on. So I called the police, and this was an evening, and I called the police, and they were very aware of the case, and they had considered it an urgent case. And they had put a detective on the case. And so they patched me in through the phone, through this detective's home phone, so I could talk to him. So I got the detective on the phone, and I explained the situation to him, and to my relief, he totally believed me. He could hear my daughter happily playing in the bathtub in the hotel room, and I gave him all the information, why I had left, where I was, when I'd be home, that I had let E know this, and all of that. And he is a very nice detective. He told me I wasn't doing anything wrong. He told me he would let E know, not where I was, but that he'd talked to me and that we were fine and stuff. But what he told me on the phone is he told me that E had told the police that I left because I was going to unalive myself and take my daughter with me. That's what he told the police. So this detective told me that he knew men like E, and that he knew exactly what to say to get them to move on the case. Because, if you say somebody's going to unalive themselves, they're going to do something. If you just say, well, my wife went away for a couple of days and left me a note saying she'd be back, then, they don't care because you're not doing anything wrong. So he knew exactly what to tell them. But then he told me something else that really blew me away. And that was, he told me he had also talked to some of my other family members, including my mother, who told him that I had been wanting to unalive myself my entire life. So, one word, alignment. What's going on? I had never shown any signs of wanting to do that growing up. And it was like totally fabricated. Coffee time. This brings me to the next viewer question. This person says, quote, "From your story, I can see why your mother didn't want you dating E. Though her methods in trying to get you to end the relationship were not the ones of a loving parent. When did your mom move from disapproving of E to becoming friendly and aligning with him?" So this I thought was a very great question. I would understand why my mom wouldn't want me to date E if she was truly a loving and caring mom, and that was her intent. However, when I reflected upon this, it was never even about approving and aligning with or disapproving of E. It was all about her non-support of me. And this is something, if you understand being the scapegoat, might make more sense to you. Because I believe that for whatever reason, maybe even subconsciously, she just didn't want me to succeed or be happy in my life. Because like every time I made a move or had something positive happen in my life or some kind of future goal, she would have something nasty to say about it. She would put me down for it. Sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, but there was always that disapproval. And then it was the same for whatever I didn't get, if that makes sense, or I didn't do or say. It was always in opposition to me. It didn't matter what I was doing, saying, or not doing or saying. It was always an opposition. So when I look back, I don't even know if I'm making sense here, but see if I can explain it. Because when I look back, she showed signs of not liking E when I was showing signs that things were good with us. And then when I showed signs of things not being good, then she showed signs of showed signs of liking him. Did I get that right? Yeah, so it was always like, if I liked him, she didn't. If I didn't like him, she did. So I guess if that makes sense. So it's not so much, to answer your question. I don't think it was so much of her changing from liking to not liking, or from not liking to aligning. It wasn't so much that at all. It was it was more of a non-support of me, part of like the scapegoat pattern. I hope that made sense and answered your question. So back to this detective, when I had heard what he said that my mom had said about me, I think that was the pivotal moment in my life where I began to start thinking that maybe no contact with her was an option, but because, to accuse me of something like that, I don't know. I just remember back then feeling very much in shock. Like, I already felt unheard and not believed and all that, but, to say something that was like so totally untrue, I don't get it. I just really don't get it. I've gone into a lot more detail about my mom in another video. If you're interested, you can find that in my playlist called My Story, some about my mother. If you're interested in hearing more about how that was. But I did go no contact with my mom not too long after that, on May 1st, 2000. But for the purposes of my story here about my marriage to E and how this all relates, some of you might be wondering why it took me so long to go no contact with my mom, and then why I stayed in my marriage for so long, 25 years. My mom had issues with my grandparents. This would be on my father's side, his parents, and she cut off contact with them for a period of several years. And of course that meant my contact with them was cut off, and I was very, very devastated at the time. I didn't understand. I wasn't getting answers if I asked why, and as a kid, I didn't care. I didn't care that there were issues. I didn't care if the issues were legitimate or not. I just know that I was cut off from my grandparents. And that might be something, like if you're an estranged adult child listening to my video, that you might want to give some thought to is, well, first of all, you shouldn't be bringing adult issues into your children's lives. But, if you want to cut off contact with your parents for whatever reason, that's your choice and everything. And they might be legitimate reasons and everything. But I feel like the children need to be considered more in the situation. Although I think it's hard, because I know some estranged situations between parents and adult children, the grandchildren are still permitted to see their grandparents, although that can't really be good either, because kids pick up on attention and all that. I think I'm going off on a tangent. But anyway, I love my grandparents, and I was cut off from them. In my situation, my mother was not treating my children the way she treated me. She was a very loving grandparent, as far as I could tell. Didn't show any signs of mistreatment, physical, mental, emotional, nothing. So, I just felt like, as a mom, I would just accept that treatment from her, because I wasn't about to devastate my children by taking their grandparent out of their life. So that was all my thoughts back then. And then, when I did go no contact with her, my two oldest girls were adults at that time. And, they can make up their own mind at that point. So, it's another sign that I see about myself now in reflection. I very much continued to put others above me and neglected myself. And some people say, well, you should always put your children first. However, what I realize now is you can't truly take care of anybody else in your life until you do take care of yourself first. And I don't consider that selfishness. And then I had similar thoughts about my marriage to E, and my primary thought back then, like I said, is I didn't want my kids to come from a broken home. But there were other things at play. That old worthless feeling that I had about myself, like I couldn't go it alone, I couldn't do it financially, and I always held out the hope that E might change. I had that stick with it, and I still have that stick with it personality. I am not one to give up easily, and I also back then thought that was all that life had to offer me. And it wasn't until later on in the marriage when my anxiety became so severe and I had to get help that I eventually was able to get out of that marriage. I had a very great psychiatrist, and I also had a very, very good therapist, both at the same time. And it took me a full year, but then I was able to finally do it and serve him divorce papers. And boy, I remember the day he received those divorce papers. I don't recall where he was served, possibly at work, maybe, if I remember right. But I remember he came home, and we were living in this trailer, pretty small. It was only a 12 by 60. And my washer and dryer was in the hallway. Here's a little recessed area. But anyway, I was standing there doing, I'm thinking this all wrong. This is why I like this script. I was out of that trailer by then. So yeah, I apologize. I'm getting myself mixed up here. Where was that? Laundry room. Okay, so we were in a home, but the laundry room was still in the hallway. I guess I get it mixed up because the hallway in that mobile home that we were in when I first got married was similar to in that home. Anyway, that's all beside the point. Who cares where the washer and dryer was, right? So I was standing there doing a load of laundry, and he was watching me put the clothes in, and I was deliberately not putting his clothes into the wash. And he was watching me, and he's like, aren't you going to put my clothes in? And I'm thinking to myself, heck no, let him do it now. Let him take care of his own self for once of his life. I was saying all this in my head, and to him, I just said no. And that really angered him, and he began to threaten me. But the threats revolved all around financial things, like I'm not going to pay child support, stuff like that. He was very quiet, but he definitely knew words to use with me and other people to strike a nerve. So I'm sure he knew that finances was a big reason I had not left him years earlier. So, he used that against me. I don't know, to scare me. I'm not sure. And reflecting, why did he even want to stay with me? I don't understand why he wanted to stay with me. Why do you want to stay with somebody if you're not interested in them? So, I don't know. And this is a really good place to add the next viewer question. And this person says, quote, just wondering if you truly loved E, unquote. And that's a really good question, because, I thought I loved him at the time, I may have then. I guess you could say it's not in the way that I understand love to be now. I think back then it was more of an attachment and a sense of duty. I had gone into the Army, I was discharged, so there went that avenue supporting myself and having a career, you know, and now I had this baby, and, you know, my family wasn't supportive, you know, and you can't lean on your family to support you, you know, once you're an adult and you have a kid. So I think I just like attached to him out of like a sense of duty, and I think it was like a survival thing more than true love back then. But over time, I did become indifferent to the situation and my feelings. The divorce process took a little bit of time. I believe it was like 4 or 5 months, and he was asked to leave the home. In the divorce papers, he was asked to leave the home, and because I ran an in-home daycare, and he refused to do that. He refused to leave the home, so he had to be court ordered to vacate, and he did. He was given 30 days, and he waited till day 30 to do that. There were actually 3 different instances during the divorce process where he was served with contempt of court, and that was just one of them. There was one day shortly after he moved out that he called CPS on me, and CPS showed up at my door one day when I was doing daycare, and I freaked out. And my initial thought was that, oh my gosh, one of my daycare parents filed a complaint against me, you know, because there's always, if any of you are familiar with daycare, you know, there are disgruntled parents all the time about this, that, and the other thing. So CPS appeared at my door, and I was freaking out, and no, but it wasn't a daycare parent, it was E. E had filed a report, and he had, it was, I don't remember exactly, it was like 11 different charges, if you want to say, complaints about me that he called them. One of the complaints was that I was allowing our youngest daughter to watch too much TV. I mean, that was actually written on the paper. And I'm like, say what? Like, I couldn't believe it. I still can't get over that. Like, she's watching too much TV. I don't remember all the other complaints, but they were all equally ludicrous like that. The only one that was like halfway serious is one of the accusations was that I was leaving her home alone. And I believe she may have been, see, my mind is really fuzzy. She might have been like 8 or 9 years old at the time that I was leaving her home alone, which of course was not something I ever did. The most I ever did was possibly run next door to my neighbors real quick to grab something. You know, it's just 8 or 9. I mean, who doesn't do that, right? But anyway, CPS checked me out and everything was good, and they dropped the charges and everything. But that was the first time that I really like witnessed like a revenge and punishment type behavior from E, where he actually did something, you know, other than just making threats, you know, except when he called the police that time that I took my daughter to the hotel, because most of his behavior consisted of threats. And I'm at the next viewer question, and I read, quote, "May I ask when you realized you wanted something different? Meaning, when did you realize you were liking girls other than men?" Well, okay, so after I served divorce papers to E, that was really the first time I recall ever starting to think about myself and my future and what I wanted and what I needed, and you know, that it wasn't just all about how he was treating me and making me feel, and you know, that I had something in me as well. And up until that point, I had subconsciously known I was a lesbian. And I would say back to my earliest memories of feeling that way would be back to my young teenage years. But I very much suppressed those feelings. Growing up as a family scapegoat, I couldn't talk about my feelings, even about the regular things in life. And, there would be no way I would dare to say something like that. So I very much suppressed that. And then at the time of my divorce from E, I had a couple of years where I was very confused about it. And I didn't really actually fully admit it to myself until I was in my early 40s. So just prior to E moving out, or the time he moved out, was during the divorce process. I think it was prior to him moving out, after he was court ordered out. I had opened up with some of my feelings about this with a friend via email. And so late one night, I'd found out later, he had been, every night after I went to bed, before he moved out, he had been hacking into my email. I don't know what he was after. But anyway, he apparently found this email where I was talking about my feelings with a friend. And what he did is he went to our two oldest daughters and told them I was a lesbian. Now, keep in mind, they were adults at the time. And, so this brings me to the next, this is a comment that I wanted to talk about because it fits in here. This viewer says, quote, "There's also the issue of parental alienation, which can be very brutal, my childhood, and it can also be very subtle or covert while passively aggressive." So looking back now, E's action and telling our two adult daughters about my lifestyle was very much the beginning of a parental alienation situation. And it is brutal because I felt like he was punishing me. But in reality, it was a really cruel thing to do to them. Some of you might be wondering, well, why didn't you tell them yourself? Well, the thing was, I planned on it. It's just that I was still in that period of confusion, and I wasn't about to go to them and say, well, girls, I think I might be a lesbian. I was confused. I didn't even know for sure. So there's that. My only, I didn't know if I liked men or women. Like, I didn't even know myself. And my only identity was mom. There was no me. There was no anything else. It was just mom. I always did feel, and I remember thinking at the time, when and if I ever knew for sure, then obviously I would tell them. And actually, when I was sure, a little later on, I did sit down and talk with my youngest daughter, who was still a minor, about it. And she was very accepting and open and supportive of her when I did just that. But anyway, he did get in trouble with the courts for hacking into my email. And that was another one of his contempt of court charges. And then as far as like additional parental alienation, I know there was some, and particularly, listen to me, let me drink some more coffee. Surrounding my middle daughter, and she was the first one that went no contact with me later on in 2017. So, and my memory's kind of sketchy about that situation, and I am going to refer to my notes here so I can get this right. I do remember that there was a period of time that this middle daughter was having some of her own issues with a relationship that she was in. And I recall being over at her home to support her in that. And something had come up. Let's say something had come up with words from her around this time. I want to see how I want to say this, because I don't want to give her personal stuff. She was having issues with the relationship she was in, and it looked like they were going to separate. It appeared that way from my perspective. And then shortly after, they had decided to work it out, again, from my perspective. But there are some words thrown in there by her, and I don't recall the exact words. And yes, I truly don't recall, for the trolls who say you conveniently don't remember. But there were some words of anger thrown in there that showed she was aligning with her father. And if I'm recalling right, this had to do with that time that I had just told you about earlier in this video, where I had taken my daughter and gone to that hotel, and he called the detective and all that. Well, when I had my daughter and brought her back to our home and walked in the door, E and my middle daughter and her guy, and I don't recall if they were married yet or still boyfriend, girlfriend, or engaged or whatever, but my middle daughter and her partner and E were all lined up sitting on the couch. And I guess they all really thought I was going to go ahead and harm my youngest child, like E had told the detective. So they were all very angry. Well, E just sat there saying nothing when I walked into the door. And my middle daughter's partner also, I believe, sat there and didn't say much, or if he did, it wasn't much. But she was very angry. And I do not recall, I'm sorry, I just can't recall everything. This was way back, several decades ago. She was very angry at me, and she was yelling at me and just being really nasty. And I remember trying to explain the situation to her, like why I left. I tried to defend myself and say that I tried to, honey, this is just not true. I was never that way that your grandma had said and your dad had said, and I was never going to harm your baby sister. Like, I tried to explain, but there's no explaining to her. No explaining. She just wouldn't listen. She was just very angry and screaming. And yeah, she might have right to be angry, but I don't know. I still feel like some guilt, like I shouldn't feel guilty. I was doing nothing wrong. I was stressed out. Yes, I took my youngest out of school. It wasn't going to hurt her. She's a straight A student. I got her schoolwork ahead of time. There was no issue there. It was just I felt so horrible in that instant because it was so reminiscent of the way I grew up. Yelled at, dismissed, criticized, not believed, not permitted to have a sense of self, not being worthy of anybody ever even listening to me, no thought, no opinion. Nobody cared. Nobody believed me. Yeah, was I feeling sorry for myself? I don't really view it as feeling sorry for myself, but it's just another one of those situations that just shows this whole family narrative about me and this alignment, and I don't even know what to say because I can't understand it. My family was all aligning. You know, if they didn't like specifically say things or show me ways they were aligning, they were just silent. And silence to me is complicity. And I know some people disagree with that. But I do believe, you know, I keep thinking of a bullying situation where a whole group of people stand around and they watch one child being beat up on, and everybody just stands there, and some are cheering and just some stand there and watch, and nobody goes and gets help and nobody steps in, and that's just very much like how it felt. And you know, I was considered the bad one in the family, the toxic one. I still am. I'm still considered that way, dismissed. I believe now, like reflecting upon that situation and looking back, I believe that my middle daughter internalized that in that situation. It was just one of other situations, none nearly as bad, if you want to say bad, in comparison. Nothing was ever compared to that bad situation. But I believe it aided her into something that I learned is called confirmation basis. And when I say this, it's hard for me to understand, so it's hard for me to verbalize it as well. But that's like where I feel like my daughter was already feeling negatively about me. She has over time selectively collected evidence, now in her mind I'm saying, to support her belief that I'm this bad mother. Like anything that I've done or not done that can be twisted and used to become proof of what a bad mother I have been. It's kind of like, see, this just confirms what I knew about her. And unfortunately, instead of communicating with me, and I did ask her several times, that she's decided to share her list of my bad actions and inactions to other family members as a means to control the narrative about me. And there's only one reason that somebody would take their perceptions about issues they have with you and broadcast those to others in the family, unless it was like an attempt to control the narrative. Of course, this is my perspective and my opinion, and I'm not in any way saying that she didn't have legitimate concerns. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that she never communicated any of those concerns to me at all in a respectful manner. You know, I just heard people say like, well, you're just not hearing it. Well, it's not really that I'm not hearing it. What I hear is anger. And it's not that I'm not willing to listen. But the things that I've heard are things like, you are horrible. Now, I don't recall her saying that specific thing. That's an example. Well, when somebody says to you, you are horrible, or you're a bad mom, or you're toxic, well, what does that mean from the mother's perspective? Like, in what way am I horrible? They're not telling you. They might think they're telling you, but they're not telling you. Just like when she, you know, if you're familiar with my story, when she said she went from being happy one minute to screaming at me and saying, I'm going to call security on you if you show up at my daughter's school, which was a pre-planned thing that we had going. People say that I'm not listening or willing to listen. Well, when you say I'm going to call security, how is that telling me what her issues are with me? Like, I was always more than willing. And like I said, I asked and asked, what are your issues with me? Talk to me, tell me what I did. What am I doing wrong so I can fix this, right? But when you throw things out like you're toxic and I'm going to call security on you, you can't sit here and say that I'm refusing to listen to her. So anyway, I know I'm going off on a tangent. I just wanted to add before I move on to my story about E is that I'm also not saying that I did not model silence to her as she was growing up, because I did. I absolutely did model that. I could have been a way better mother in that way, and although I didn't do it intentionally, it was modeled to me and blah, blah, blah. The bottom line is I did model that, and I fully acknowledge that. But in reflection, there was something else that I modeled when my girls were growing up. I also modeled trying, giving people the benefit of the doubt. I very much gave people the benefit of the doubt, not only in my marriage to their father, but in that 12-year toxic relationship that I got in with a woman after I divorced E, as some of you have heard me talk about. I very much modeled trying, giving the benefit of the doubt, working with. Also with E, their father, I also modeled attempting to talk to him over and over and over again. So I also modeled that. So something like, when I was trying to write the timeline for this video, I'm sitting here like blaming myself. Yeah, I was a bad mom. I modeled silence. I modeled not speaking out. But you know what? I did speak out. I very much spoke out. And I very much modeled giving people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe, some of these people didn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. But then, so how come you could say that my family is not now giving me the benefit of the doubt? So it can't just be, well, you're bad because you modeled silence. So if I'm bad, then I should be good for modeling perseverance. I can't say the word. And trying and attempting to talk. I even attempted as an adult myself to talk to my mother. I didn't, some of you know, I did not go no contact with her because of the way she had treated me growing up. It was because I basically gave up trying to talk to her when she wouldn't return the same to me. So, I know she also saw me with my younger brother who had an issue with me. She obviously, if she knew I was standing back, she had obviously witnessed me trying with him, to communicate with him, to no avail. She was old enough at that time. And I know that my girl's perception is different than mine, and that's fine. Everybody has different perceptions of different things. I also know that my family doesn't believe in me. They don't believe me. And they're still thinking that I'm a bad person. But I can't honestly say that my silence and standing back is the reason for why I'm estranged from my family. It is truly because I'm the family scapegoat. And now having this YouTube channel where I'm speaking out, they've wanted me to be silent they have shown that in their actions and in specific words that have been told to me by various family members. They want me to be silent. And to me, it just shows proof of this, what I've called confirmation bias. See how bad I am, see how bad I am. And then, like, back to this parental alienation, it's the same thing is true with E, because he has aligned himself with my family and vice versa. And instead of supporting me as a person and as the mother of his children, and all the good traits that I did install in my kids, because they do have some very awesome traits, I'm just made out to be this bad person. I think this is probably a really good place to stop. Like I said, I plan on having the final part 3 out in just 2 days on Wednesday, so you guys don't have to wait a week. In that video, I'm going to talk about how things were with E after our divorce. I'm going to also talk about the notion that dads often seem to be given a free pass when it comes to estrangement, where moms seem to be held to a higher standard. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about how I feel about all of it now, where I'm at, how things stand now, and then any viewers' questions and comments that I didn't get to in this video are going to be included in that video, as well as any that I get out from this video within the next day. And then, like I said, if you have more questions after I film the final part, I'm going to add them next Monday when I do my next Q&A. So, as always, if you want any clarification from anything I've said, please just ask. Keep the comments respectful. I don't mind disagreements. I do require respect here on my channel, not just for me, but for the other members in our community. So take care, and I hope you're all doing very well, and I'll see you soon in the next video.